Chapter 2. Even Friends Must Part. Is Sir Amherst de Solitaire residing here? A man with curly brown hair and a silk cape draped over his shoulders stood in the hall. She is staying with us temporarily, but is going back to live with the royal family in a week, Margaret said. Would you care to join us in the family room to explain more about who you are? Of course, provided that her ladyship is present, the man said, his eyes wandering around the room. Naturally. Margaret led the man up the stairs, helping the young child grasping her hand. Seraphina met them on the way down. Would you mind running up to tell Amherst she has a visitor? Margaret said. Sure, Mamma, Seraphina smiled, glancing at the middle-aged man. She hurried to Amherst's room and knocked lightly on the oak door. Come in! Amherst, a mass of curly black hair framing brown eyes, sat painting a picture of the ocean out her window. Oh, hi, Sarah, she said, grinning. Any more news on the Peace Endeavour? She set her brush down and leaned forward. No, although I suspect Papa will tell us more about it at supper, she said, smiling and sitting down beside her friend. But you have a visitor. A visitor? It's not another suitor, I hope, Amherst said, rolling her eyes. Seraphina laughed. I don't think so. He's a middle-aged man and hasn't given his name yet. Well, let's go find out what he wants, Amherst said. Both headed out the door and down the hall, laughing and chatting. As they entered, the man stood and bowed. It is good to see you, my lady. I'm your new regent, Lord Neil. Oh, how do you do? Good. Won't you have a seat? Amherst sat next to Seraphina. Margaret was trying to keep Lottie occupied. So, what are you doing here? Amherst asked, studying the man. It is very hard to communicate with your ladyship when you are away from Salatam. Getting your approval on ideas is difficult. Didn't you get my denial last month? Amherst asked. Yes, I did, but I think you misunderstand things when you're disconnected from the land and the people. He took a breath and glanced at Margaret. I've come to take you back to Salatam. What? Amherst stood up. This is ridiculous. I'm the Duchess of Salatam. Not yet. You are a minor, so I don't care if I'm a minor. I am still your liege lady, and you can't make me leave. Amherst should have a say in this, Margaret said, calmly coming to stand beside Amherst. Neil reached into his satchel and pulled out some parchments. He handed them to Margaret. She began reading them, her countenance changing to one of concern. What is it? Seraphina asked, trying to read over her mother's shoulder. Margaret slowly gave them back to the regent and looked at Amherst with sad eyes. I think he's right, honey. The law states that the regent of a minor decides how she can best rule and does have the authority to make the minor follow advice. But can't you do something? Can't you order him to offer different advice or take away his authority? She asked, the fire in her eyes fading into uncertainty. Margaret glanced at the regent. Not even a duchess is above the law, Amherst. Amherst turned to the regent and coldly looked down at him. Very well, regent. When do we leave? Soon as your trunks are packed. Sir, won't you at least stay for supper? I'm going to miss my best friend, Seraphina implored, tears forming in her eyes. Neil took a short breath. We really must be going. It's a long journey back to Salatam Duchy. Very well. I hope you can look after yourself. I'm going to help Amherst pack, Margaret said, picking Lottie up and following the girls out of the room. Once in her room, Amherst flung herself on her bed. I'm not going. You can throw me in the dungeon if you want, but I simply won't go. Margaret sat beside her and stroked her hair. Calm down, Amherst. We'll come and visit you. And besides, it'll be a new adventure, ruling your own duchy. Don't you think she'll enjoy it there? Margaret asked Seraphina. Seraphina bit her lip and sat down on the other side of Amherst. I don't know. Will you send me messages, Amherst? I'll be so lonely here without you. Amherst turned to her friend. Of course I'll send you messages. Her face became downcast. But Eleanor and Edward don't even know. Owen will think I don't want to see him anymore, she said, leaning her head on Margaret's shoulder. Oh, Auntie Margaret, I'll miss you guys. I don't see why he wants me there anyway. I won't know what to decide without all of you here to help me. Margaret frowned. You may not get to decide much anyway. Then she smiled. Hopefully you will, though, and, well, you're getting old enough to make the decisions on your own now, if he allows. Still a year until I'm 18. Not quite there, Amherst replied. Well, we best get packing, Margaret said. Seraphina tried not to cry as she helped Amherst pack her clothes. I haven't been at the castle much. It reminds me too much of the revolution, Amherst sighed. I still remember those days, even though I was only 7. Seraphina nodded. Memorable times, not in a good way. Seraphina looked down. I can still see those awful peasants as they murdered my little sister, and a tear slid down Seraphina's cheek. Let's not talk about it, Sarah, Amherst said quietly. Hopefully I'll have a great time at the castle. When all the packing was done, Amherst stood and walked over to her painting. Turning to the window, she called, Goodbye, ocean. I'll see you no more. The dingy old cell smelled rotten and putrid. The darkness was only partly broken by the stream of light coming through the bars in the door. A shadow darkened the doorway, and the metallic grating of a key turned the rusty lock was heard. A beautiful woman dressed in silk and jewels entered the room. Her pet cheetah slunk in behind her. As the door clicked shut, Isabel's eyes scanned the room. In a corner strewn with dirty hay, an old woman with gray hair and a wrinkled face sat peering at the queen with sharp eyes, muttering constantly to herself. That's it. There, it's all happened. Then a shadow crossed the woman's face, and she turned away with wide eyes. But it's coming. No one will ever know. Woman, Isabel said. The old woman looked up as if seeing Isabel for the first time. Ah, you've come again. I knew you would. Her expression twisted into a bitter, frightened look. It was shaking. The whole room was a terrible dream. It's all happening again, I assure you. She stood, wagging her finger violently at Isabel. You traitor! It's all your fault! This whole island will no longer exist! Her whole body shook with anger and apprehension, her expression intense. Miura had gone and calmly lay down in the other corner, flicking her tail back and forth. Isabel swallowed and tried to remain calm. Calm down. What are you talking about? I came to see if you still lived after the shake we just had. But I can see you are your normal, crazy old self. The old woman tilted her head, putting her hand to the wall, her face breaking with sudden sorrow. No, she sobbed, her shoulders heaving as she slowly sank to the floor. Why do you treat me this way? Her old eyes closed in pain, tears spilling down her face. There was a time when we were close, a time when you called me mother. Isabel sighed impatiently and was about to speak, but the woman spoke again. I loved you. I still love you, my dear daughter. She stretched her shaky hand out towards the cold queen standing before her. Then her sorrow turned to resolve. She caught her breath and looked up with concerned eyes. Isabel, it's coming. I know I must warn you. Even though you have treated me poorly, I cannot let this happen to you. Isabel looked uncomfortable and glanced towards the door. Her mother's eyes wandered, terror and horror written on her face. Her mind was in another time. It's boiling. Hot. Steam and ash spew forth. She paused, shaking her head sadly. Cracks in the earth, violent shaking. Then she suddenly looked up, like she had remembered something. The volcano! It's happening! We'll all die, covered in lava. Our beautiful city of Zakata, gone. Isabel was disturbed, staring at her knowledgeable mother with alarm. Could it be true? She said to herself in a barely audible whisper. Take warning, my dear Isabel. Flee for your life, the woman pleaded with large, sorrowful eyes. Isabel slowly turned around, opening the door to the cell. Her cold demeanor suddenly returned as she took one last glance at her mother. Well, you're still alive. Then she added to Miura. Come, Miura. The wind blew hard against horse and rider. The whites showed on the palfrey's eyes. Flecks of foam formed on its hide. He galloped wildly down the road, the little boy gripping his mane, terror grasping at his heart. Suddenly a cart drove in front. The horse reared. Mama! The little boy cried as he was flung into the air. Peter awoke with a start, sitting up in bed. He was breathing heavily. The moon shone through the slats of the shutter into the little fisherman's hut. Peter's wife slowly got up on one elbow. Are you all right? Peter slowly swung his feet down to the floor. It's that dream again, that nightmare from my past. She shook her head sadly. I wish there was some way I could help you. Peter stood and walked across the floor to the brick fireplace up in the middle of the room. I'm just gonna go get some water. I'll be back. He grabbed a bucket and headed out the door into the warm night. Why is this dream so important, he thought. Why has it constantly come back to me for the 10 years of my known life? He went into a grove of trees, his mind still circling around and around. Who am I? Do I want to know? Or am I content to live this happy life, not knowing who I ever was? Besides the dream of him and the horse, only a few others had interrupted his happy life, but they were becoming more frequent. I've had a vision of a puppy licking my face, so I had a dog when I was little, perhaps. I've had a dream of a castle looming before me. Perhaps I was a servant at a castle. But all of them are void of people. They tell me very little about who I really am, he thought, shaking his head. On the other side of the grove of trees, he came to a small hamlet, a well residing in the middle, and he drew some water, taking a long draught. Before returning to the house, one haunting question came to his mind. Is my family out there looking for me? And if they ever find me, will I remember them? Seraphina knelt beside a large walnut chest and lifted the lid. A cittern lay in the box. She picked it up. She sat on her pink bedspread and began playing a mournful tune. She slowly stopped and closed her eyes. How could my best friend just leave? Who do I even talk to anymore? Take my troubles to? A small, quiet voice said, "The Comforter." She smiled and took her breath. Lord, I don't know why she had to go, but I know that you will be with me. Your rod and your staff will comfort me. Seraphina heard a commotion outside and set the instrument on her bed as she went to look out the window into the courtyard. Knights gathered around her papa as he rode in with a message in his hands. Arthur was calming the knights as he dismounted. Seraphina turned and ran down the hall to see what had happened. Miss Seraphina, food is ready. A servant met her in the hall. Okay, I'll get papa to come join us. Arthur and Leonardo on one side and Friedrich on the other. You should decline. Why get yourself entangled in this? Leonardo said as they walked inside and headed towards the dining room. Food's ready, Papa. Won't you please tell us the news? Seraphina said. Yes, Seraphina. Would you gentlemen join us in the dining room for further discussion? Arthur asked. Both accepted and they all gathered around the table. Margaret sat beside Arthur at the front and everyone began piling their plates. All 7 of Margaret and Arthur's children were present, and the noisy den of hungry children postponed the conversation until everyone had begun eating. So, Edward has officially accepted the offer that Curtis has proposed, that we come to the summit. That's wonderful, Margaret said, delicately sipping from her goblet. Are we going? Seraphina asked, with an edge of uncertainty in her voice. That's the question. Curtis has invited the families to come to release some of the tension. His wife, Lady Juliana, is bringing her children. Matilda and I are going, Friedrich said. You're taking your children to a world leaders conference? Seraphina said, setting her eating utensil down. I sure am. We're good friends with Juliana and Curtis, and we haven't seen their children for a long time. I've heard that Lady Juliana is a wonderful hostess. It would maybe be a relaxing vacation, Margaret said, looking at Arthur. Where's it going to be, Mama? Gerizan asked, suddenly gaining interest. It would be in the mountains, Arthur replied. Sounds fun, Gerizan said. I like vacations too, Timothy added, stuffing his mouth full. This isn't a vacation, Leonardo said. This is a futile discussion that can only end in more strife. Come on, Leonardo. Your discernment is clouded by your prejudice, Friedrich said. So is yours, Sir Friedrich. You only think it's a good idea because you're friends with Curtis, but you haven't taken into account all the other factors. What basis or factors have you considered? Arthur finally asked Leonardo. Sir, the last time you went to Boulogne, you were almost killed by a Cretarian. Why would you want to make peace with this warring nation, a kingdom that used to be ours? Seraphina shivered. Papa was almost killed, she thought. The choice of peace is not mine to make, Arthur said, turning to face Leonardo. Edward will decide that. I will only be backup and support. So, we are going? Seraphina asked cautiously. Arthur took a breath and glanced at Margaret. I think we should. But what if it's a trick? Seraphina thought. I don't really like this plan. Seraphina took a breath and tried to hide her feelings of apprehension. All right, Gerazan said. When do we get to go?